Brought to you by CGTN Europe.
Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole. According to the Institute of International Finance, total world debt has reached $255 trillion, and that's more than 1 million times the cost of China's Bird's Nest Stadium. So, is debt becoming a global problem? In this programme, The Agenda looks at the role debt plays in the global economy and in our daily lives. Now, personal debt in the UK is higher than ever at around £217 billion, and that's almost $280 billion. Banks in debt often get bailed out, but who's saving us from high-cost lenders and that vicious cycle of credit? Joining me now is Lynn James, founder of Mrs Mummypenny, who broke free from her debt and is now helping others do just that. And also with us is Dr. Johnna Montgomerie from King's College London, author of Should We Abolish Household Debt? But I want to start with you, Lynn, first. A degree in mathematics?
Yes.
An accountant?
Yeah.
And you still went into debt to the tune of, what, £16,000 over, what, almost $30,000?
Yeah. So it was a change of circumstance which arrived at that debt, which I think is something that's a common situation for a lot of people. I decided to set up my own business, and I used to work in the city for a telco company as an accountant, and I didn't adjust my life as quickly as I should have done. So I was living off of redundancy money. That ran out quicker than I thought. I was spending the same way as I did when I earned more money, and then I built up some debt. So
the key advice is, if you're spending more than you're earning, then you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah. And it was an element of keeping up with the Joneses, going on certain holidays, buying certain clothes, because I was still in this mould of when I was working that employed life. So I didn't change my money mindset quickly enough.
Okay, let's go to Johnna. You've written a book called Should We Abolish Household Debts?
This book is about looking at the bigger picture, the bigger macroeconomic picture that debt is causing. Because if debt is a personal problem, it's one shared by an ever-growing portion of society. And that means that it's not just down to personal choice. There are bigger issues at play. So we hear this example of the number one reason in the UK that people get into problem debt is because of an unforeseen event. So you are made redundant, your hours are cut, a family member is made ill and are unable to work. These events, we used to have a safety net to allow people to have that cushion until they get back on their feet.
What was that safety net?
So that safety net would have been unemployment benefit for when you're made redundant. You would be allowed to have benefit if you were made ill and unable to work. But now,
and a limited overdraft, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. And also there would be sort of support for families in terms of, again, when a family member is ill, that it's not just, oh, well, if you can't work today, you won't be paid. So these things have been slowly eroded as the cost of living is going up. And what we find is that more and more people are getting into debt, not only because they've chose to buy things they can't afford, but they've had to go into debt out of necessity. So here we think about young people who took out student loans to get an education, then go into the job market, are precarious laborers, and then are made unemployed. They've built up this debt in good faith to get a start at a future that others were offered and given opportunity without debt. And then we say, well, it's a personal problem. It is slightly a personal problem, but there are also much bigger economic issues at play here. And we need to start thinking in this book about debt abolition as a way of reviving the economy and allowing it to grow in a more sustainable way than this kind of boom-bust bailout cycle that we're currently in and really just on the verge of repeating again.
Yeah. Lynn, I mean, basically, you got into debt because it was your fault. You spent too much.
I spent too much.
We're not talking about a student getting into debt because of student fees and everything else they have to spend. But yours was, I saw a credit card, I saw something I wanted, and I bought it.
And the credit was so easily accessible. Like even now, when I'm in this position of, I don't have any credit card debt now, but I've still got the ability to get £40,000 worth of credit.
Johnna, the advice people will always give you, say, well, why don't you live within your means? Is that helpful or is that unhelpful?
Well, I think it's more the kind of contradiction that we face when we live in such a large economy. I mean, Britain's one of the largest economies in the world. The truth is that everybody should follow this advice. You should absolutely get a budget, and you should most certainly never spend beyond the limits of your income if you don't want to get into problem debt. But the reality is that if everybody followed this advice from Black Friday or over the Christmas period, the entire UK economy will be in a recession in the new year. And we will all suffer as a result of this kind of, Keynes talked about this paradox of thrift. Thrift is a very good thing on an individual level, but on the level of an entire economy, it is actually can cause recession and deep depression if it's not thought about in a holistic way.
Young people get into debt. Does that mean they're living with debt nearly all their lives, so they get used to that, get used to having so much debt, and therefore is that a dangerous emotion to have?
Well, I think absolutely acclimatizing yourself to having, for example, the average they say is £14,000. This is almost a part-time income that people are accessing on average in order to kind of fund their lifestyle. And I do think if you get used to it, you'll never ask the question, wouldn't it be better if I earned £14,000 more a year versus stay where I am and just take out a loan? The personal debt levels have crept up in the UK precisely at the time when wages have stagnated. So we kind of know that that's a factor, but also at the same time as the social safety net has steadily eroded and the cost of housing has gone up and up and up. So they're connected, although people will have credit cards perhaps because their mortgage is very expensive, so they have to make ends meet. So they are connected, even though they're different types of debt. And we see the level of debt, for example, in the UK, private debt is as high as public debt. So while people will bang on endlessly about, what about the future generation? What about our children with this big public debt? They don't want to talk about the private debt, but it's as big and as big a problem,
Lastly, Lynn, advice to young people or anybody in debt?
It's touching on what you said earlier on. I discovered debt when I was young, when I was 18, and it took me 20 years to get out of that cycle of, it just felt like the norm to have that debt. So it's changing that mindset of really working hard to get out of that debt and getting to the position where, no, this isn't my money. This is money that I have to pay back, and changing your life and your budgets and living within your means.
Lee Bu-Kite is a veteran lawyer who has served more than 4 decades on the sovereign debt front line and joins me now in the Agenda studio. Lee Bu-Kite, what exactly does the IMF do? And does it do it well?
Okay. It performs a series of functions. Every year, the IMF conducts what they call surveillance of each member country. They send a team of economists to the country. They assess the country's fiscal and monetary policies, and they offer advice. When a country gets into trouble, their role expands considerably. The IMF will offer financial assistance to the country, but never without strings attached. And those strings take the form of prescriptions for fiscal adjustment, and typically the financial assistance is conditioned upon the country meeting certain prescribed targets. That involvement by the IMF then becomes crucial as the country's other creditors, their government creditors and their commercial creditors, assess whether the country is reforming its economy and stands some chance of repaying the debt on its new terms. And all of that falls on the shoulders of the IMF.
When a country gets into serious trouble, it invariably goes bankrupt. You've represented just about every single country that's gone bankrupt, so that when you land at the airport in that country, is that when they start worrying?
No, they will have started worrying long before that. By the time they get around to calling someone like me, it is clear that they have run out of more palatable options.
Do you have to sometimes return to the country a second time? Do they learn from their mistakes?
You mean, do countries go through debt restructurings multiple times? Yes, I'm afraid they do. Argentina, as you see at the moment, is on the verge of yet another one, having only emerged from the last one 4 years ago.
And the IMF lent them 50 billion.
Well, I think they have now an exposure of 44 billion. Yes, they did. That I think is the largest program the IMF has ever implemented.
Venezuela?
Venezuela is a difficult case, and I'm acting as strategic advisor to the Guaido administration in Venezuela. Venezuela has about 155 billion of external debt. Most of it is in default. But the debt restructuring for that country cannot begin until Nicolas Maduro, the current president, at least as he sees it, leaves. But he has proven to be far more adhesive than any of us thought he would be.
In Europe, we know about the financial problems, especially in southern Europe, in Portugal, in Greece, in Italy. They have borrowed hugely from the ECB and other sources. Can they ever reasonably or feasibly expect to pay off those debts?
I think you have to analyze that country by country. Greece, which has borrowed the most and which has the highest so-called debt to gross domestic product ratio. Greece has benefited because those official creditors have stretched out those loans for a very long period of time and given Greece the benefit of a very low interest rate. But it is a staggering debt stock.
So you're basically saying they won't ever pay off those debts?
Well, I suspect at some point in the future, when memories have faded and politicians have left the stage, there will be, people will revisit those debt stocks.
When you say revisit, I mean, will they write them off?
Some of it, I suspect, yes. Not, I think, without conditions. They will write it off if the debtor country implements certain economic fiscal policies, in effect earns the debt relief.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of The Agenda. If you'd like to hear more from us, you can subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher or Spotify. You can also give us feedback with a review. Remember, you can also find The Agenda on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Just search for CGTN Europe. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.